Welcome back to the Garden State Law Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Lau. Joining me today is Saiber Family Law Practice Chair, Stacey Cozewith. Stacey, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, Stacey, you joined the firm, what, about 6 months ago, maybe less, the beginning of
Not
2025?
even. Yeah, the end of January.
Yeah, so very exciting. We're very excited to have you here. So for our listeners and our watchers, you may know that Saiber is a full-service firm. We're celebrating our 75 years this year.
Long time.
Just in April, just 2 months ago, 75 years. But we've never had a family law practice. So you're here to launch our practice. It's very exciting. We love having you here. So I want to talk a little bit about you, your career, family law specifically. And then at the end, if we can get into maybe a little more fun questions to get to know Stacy, that'd be great. So let's start with that. You work in family law.
I do.
Tell us a little bit about your career and what made you decide that family law is right for you.
Sure. So after law school, I clerked for the presiding family law judge in Somerset County, Judge Thomas Diltz. Mm-hmm. And I got to see the behind the scenes, first time really what goes on in family law court. Mm-hmm. And I really liked the idea of helping people. Prior to that in law school, I was super interested in cases where family issues came up, whether they were con law, business law. Why do businesses sometimes break up because of family law issues? And so it definitely sparked my interest prior to clerkship. And then after my clerkship, it just really solidified seeing what good a court could do and what good attorneys could do, that was the right place for me. I also like the fact that I'm not sitting behind a desk all the time. Yeah. I mean, court,
the personal side of it.
Right. And I'm also, writing briefs sometimes. And I'm, it's a good mix for me. And I really like helping people, not just pushing paperwork, but actually helping people. And so after that, I went to work for a firm where I basically spent most of my career, over 20 years, until coming to Saiber.
Yeah. So I have to imagine family law, it's like there's two sides of it, right? So practice of law is difficult in and of itself, right? Whether you're an M&A attorney and you're closing transactions, or you're a commercial litigator dealing with complicated commercial litigation matters. But so you have that part of it, but then there's the emotional side of things that most lawyers don't quite deal with in the way that you do, where you have to have this empathetic side and really getting to know, the personal lives of your clients. So I feel like it's complicated on a whole other level than what a lot of lawyers have to deal with.
It is. It's not just one area of the law, really, because you're dealing with real estate, you're dealing with businesses and their valuations, you're dealing with custody and parenting time and that aspect of the law. But at the end of the day, you hit the nail on the head with the empathy part. And I feel like I really connect with people. And, I go about things trying to resolve things amicably. That's always my hope and my goal, to do things efficiently and work towards the best end for both parties. However, I am not afraid to get into court and can be aggressive when I need to be. One of my friends told me I'm the prettiest bulldog you'll ever meet. So there's that aspect too. And I like to fight for my clients when necessary.
Yeah. So when you came to the firm, I got to know family law a little bit better. And naturally you think of divorce, right? That's the first thing that pops to your mind. But there's this whole other suite of things that you do. It's funny, this morning when I was dropping my kids off to school, my son was just kind of made a joke that he was listening to the podcast recently. And I said, it's funny you say that because I'm recording today. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, family law. And he said, what is that about? And I said, well, divorce is a thing, but there's this whole other set of things. I had mentioned prenuptial agreements, and he's like, what is that about? Can you? So we had a very heavy conversation on the way. But, maybe explain to us a little bit about beyond just, divorce, but what are the other components do you handle on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis that encompass family law that maybe we don't think about?
So you mentioned prenuptial agreements. I do those. And then, divorce is a big subset. So custody, parenting time, child support, alimony, distribution of your assets and your debts. Post-judgment, you come back because maybe now your child's going to college and you can't agree on who's paying for what. Modification of support. Maybe your spouse is now cohabitating negotiating with somebody, or God forbid you lose your job, or, unemployment situations, disability situations that support needs to be modified. We also deal with grandparent visitation, issues, adoption. That's always the good part of family law.
Yeah.
But everything that you would deal in the family court is things that I handle. Domestic violence is a big one.
Yeah. So going back to divorce, and even domestic violence to a certain extent, it must be an interesting role that you have to play because you have the softer side with your clients. And then you have to be, as you said, a bulldog. How do you balance those two things? And what is your approach typically? Maybe you can expand a little bit about how you're aggressively advocating. You have to have the softer side at one side. Then you have to turn a switch, and you have to be tougher.
Right.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about, the
process.
Yeah, the process, really.
Sure. So with my clients, that's where the empathetic side comes in. I really connect with them because I want to help them. And so that's the softer side. We want to work towards a goal. We develop an action plan, and we go step by step over what they can expect and what's going to happen next. Oftentimes, which is frustrating for parties, is that I can't say this is going to happen next because it depends on what the other side does, how reasonable they're being. We would always like to resolve things, but I'm not going to recommend you resolve things in an unfair manner. And if one side is being unreasonable, that's when you usually have to litigate. So with my adversaries, I work in family law. I've been working in family law for over 20 years. You deal a lot with the same attorneys, and you see them, in outside of the office, inside the office. And that's helpful because I know their personalities and I know how to deal with them. And so we normally work collegially together because at the end of the day, if the parties are having an argument, I wasn't there, my adversary wasn't there. It does not do the clients a service for us to talk about, well, your client did this and my client did this. No, instead, the attorney and I, my adversary and I, can figure out how can we resolve this. If we can't, if the other side's being completely unreasonable, that's when court is an option, and it's a last resort. But we utilize it maybe to put some fire under their feet because they don't want to get a divorce and they're not doing anything, and we want to move this case along. Or maybe because one side refuses to pay for the things that they're supposed to be paying for. You're supposed to maintain the financial status quo, and if one side skips town or stops paying the bills, then you have to go to court and get an order requiring them to do what they need to do.
Yeah, it's interesting dealing with the adversary as attorneys and seeing them so often. Is that something that you mind? Are you trying to stay in touch with these people? I know you go like the bar events and stuff. And is that a big part of your business process of having good relationships with the attorneys of your adversaries?
It is, because you are going to see these people time and time again. And and you're going to work together time and time again. And so we both want the same thing. We both want a resolution that's going to be best for our clients and to end it as quickly as possible. Sometimes the parties don't want that. Or sometimes I have an adversary that maybe I don't work with very often who maybe was hired and doesn't exclusively practice family law.
Yeah.
You want an attorney, if you're going through divorce, you want an attorney that practices family law as their main practice. Because sometimes when people dabble in it, they don't understand the court rules. I know I'm going to be telling my client, look, if you went to court, this is what's likely to happen. This is in the range of reasonable of what a court could order you to do. And I want my adversary telling their client exactly the same thing. This is the range, so that we know when we come to the table and try and resolve it, we both know maybe if you get something better than what a court would order on one hand, you're giving up and waiving something that's maybe not as important to you. On the other hand, that's more important to your spouse. And so that's the right way to negotiate and to mediate. And when you have an adversary that you work with often, you know what they're telling the other side. And so that's important.
So when you have a client or prospective client come to you, what does ideal scenario look like for you? An ideal client is someone who is what? Are they well prepared? Do they have all their ducks in the row? They have documented things? What is like, okay, they really seem to know, what they're doing, and I feel comfortable moving forward with this.
So often a lot of parties don't know anything about their finances. Maybe they weren't the one who paid the bills. Often in marriages or in relationships, one party takes out the garbage and one party orders the new school clothes.
Sure.
You divide and conquer, especially when you have children. And so I find often one party didn't deal with the finances, doesn't know where the bank accounts are, doesn't know what the total income is.
Yeah.
Maybe their spouse even signed the tax return for them. They just don't have that information.
I might be one of those people.
And that's fine.
Sure.
I don't mind clients like that because we'll get to the bottom of it. We'll find all the information. We'll use subpoenas, depositions, and the information has to be forthcoming. That's what the whole discovery period is. From the time that you decide this is the next step, if it's a divorce situation, until the time of trial, that period is called the discovery period. And what we do is we're trying to ascertain what your assets are, what the values of those assets are, what are the debts, what are the values, what are your monthly expenses, and what is the income coming in. Once we have numbers on everything, then we can have a discussion of, okay, well, this is the right support number, or I'll take this asset, you take that asset. Until we have a clear picture of everything, it's hard to negotiate. Sure. So in that period, we'll find all that. So an ideal client doesn't have to know everything. An ideal client has to be honest. An ideal client should be, unreasonable. They should not be unreasonable, to use a double negative. They should be reasonable.
Do you get a lot of clients who are not honest and you later find out, hey, I wish you told me this because I could have helped you more had I known the full truth?
I wouldn't say a lot, but you do get some. And the other part is you want people, some people say, I want to do X, Y, or Z because it's going to hurt the other side. I don't care what impact that has on my children. I don't care what impact that's going to have on the total financial package that I receive. I just want to hurt the other side. And so that anger, you're not ready to go through divorce. You obviously need therapy. Yeah. And I would never, as an attorney, as a mother, as just a human, I would never allow a party to do something that's going to hurt the children. Yeah. Even though I'm not necessarily an attorney for the children, there are people who do that work as a GAL. Sometimes I've been appointed in that way from a court, but I would never assist a client to do something that's going to hurt them or the kids. And so that's obviously not an ideal client.
Yeah. Okay. So level-headed, really, is what you're saying.
Level-headed, normal, reasonable, and who, understands that it's going to take time. And I'm ready to hold their hand and walk them through what is really, honestly, an awful process. Yeah. It is. I wouldn't wish divorce litigation or any type of family law litigation on my worst enemy. It is an awful process, and part of it is the court system is not ideal. It's just like any other government agency. We have wonderful judges in this state. There's not enough of them, and the process does not go smoothly because everyone's permitted their day in court, and there are certain protections put in place for people, such as the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act, the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, that people can use as a weapon during a divorce matter. And so there's a lot of pitfalls that I can help you navigate through, hold your hand, during the process, and hopefully get to the end as quickly and efficiently.
Sure. So you talked a little bit about finances. How does this really, I'm at the age where I've known a lot of people have gone through the process and they say, God, it's expensive and it's a really difficult thing to go through. How does this really impact a family financially going through, the process?
It's devastating.
Yeah.
It's devastating. So, you can have hundreds of thousands of dollars in income, millions of dollars in income, or tens of thousands of dollars in income. At the end of the day, most parties are not huge savers. Some people are, and that's great if you are, but most parties spend what they earn. And so when you're going from one household to now two households, you're not going to have enough money to maintain the standard of living. Yeah. You're also now dividing all of your assets in half, and you're each going to live on those separately with separate expenses. So it's hard, but you know what? At the end of the day, you have to be reasonable and fair. And most parties who are going through this process are going through the process because they're going to be happier at the end. And you can always, money is, you can't be buried with it, right? And at the end of the day, your happiness is what's important. And that's what I'm going to help you do, to come out at the end with the most safety, the most security financially that you can have while still being reasonable and fair, and move on.
We talked a little bit about what you look for an ideal client. What about the other way around? What should an individual is considering divorce or, any areas of family law, what should they be looking for specifically when, kind of canvassing the landscape to see who's out there? Is it just a personality match? What should they be focused on in terms of hiring a family law attorney?
So certainly my relationship with a client is like any other relationship. You want to connect. Mm-hmm. You want to feel, you said personality matching. That's important. Mm-hmm. You want to feel like, not necessarily you have a new best friend, mm-hmm. But you want to feel like you can relate with this person. You can talk to this person. You feel comfortable with this person because you're going to be dealing with the most intimate details of your life.
And a lot.
Right. Yeah. And you want to feel like you can trust this person, that you're on the same wavelength, that they get back to you quickly. So, that's important. But you also want to feel, of course, that the attorney is competent, mm-hmm. knows the law, knows what they've been doing, have sufficient experience mm-hmm. in, with regard to any issues that are affecting you. And so that's what I bring to the table, both the relationship. My clients who come to me, I can usually relate to them and we have a good relationship. I have staff or a department. So we have a wonderful firm, whereas if I'm in court or otherwise, in a meeting and a client needs an answer, we have associate attorneys, we have paralegals and staff who can get them to me or get their question answered, scheduling appointments and things like that. So it's important that you have constant contact with your attorney. And as we spoke about, I have over 20 years of experience doing all aspects and exclusively family law. So when my clients come to me, they know that I know what I'm talking about and I'm competent in both my litigation and in my resolution.
Mm-hmm. So you and I will talk about reality TV every so often.
We do.
It's a little bit of a guilty pleasure. I find it interesting because I'm not a lawyer, spent 20 years nearly within law firms. And we see, a lot of legal matters get brought up in TV and reality TV. What is it that separates, how is it different from your aspect of law and then what you see on TV, even if it's not reality TV, if you see them in the courtroom? How is it different between what the average person sees? Because oftentimes if someone's going through a divorce, it's their first real experience in dealing with a lawyer. Aside from maybe closing on a house or something, this is like the first time they're really getting in it.
Right.
Where's the line drawn where like, this is reality and that's TV stuff?
Right. Well, TV, everything happens within the hour show, right?
Everything moves so quickly.
Yes. And that is not reality. Sure. The divorce process is lengthy. Ideally, you come to me, we resolve the matter before even filing anything with the court. But that's the ideal situation, and things don't always happen in an ideal manner. It could take a year. It could take more, depending on the county and depending on if we have to litigate any aspect of it. So that's certainly not what happens on TV in the courtroom. For example, on Suits, Harvey gets a case, he argues it once, and by the end of the episode, he's done.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes, that's not how it happens. Every case is not necessarily argued between court. Every case is not necessarily as adversarial, right? I feel like on a lot of these TV shows, and it's one or the two. Either it's like a slimy deal where, it's not good for the client, or it's litigated and heavily, with the attorneys butting heads. Sure. And that's not reality either, So, but there was a Good Wife. The Good Wife, I definitely felt that was a little more in terms of the courtroom scenes real. That's really the only legal show that I've seen where it was like, okay, I could see that her arguments in court were somewhat similar. We have no juries in family law. Oftentimes you see juries in the courtroom scenes. But it just as with any other issues, the doctor shows every issue. It's not really real.
We have to make it interesting.
It's fun. It's entertainment for sure.
But real life can be boring sometimes.
It can, but you know what? Family law is never boring. Honestly, people say who do different areas of the law, like I have a friend who practices tax law. And I'm like, oh, how do you, like, I like numbers.
Sure.
But how do you do that, right? And my friend's like, how do you do family law? I'm like, listen, it is never boring. You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it all. So if someone is facing down something that is something horrific that they couldn't imagine, don't worry that I haven't seen it, because I feel like I have seen just it all. People, what happens behind closed doors, sometimes you wouldn't expect. Yeah. And so that's, in my sense, it's an interesting part of family law, because it's certainly never boring.
You say that, and then next week something happens and you go, never seen that before.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You can't make it up. So it certainly feels like sometimes reality TV, but it's not.
So someone who's contemplating divorce, what do you recommend to them? What are the first steps that they should do? I would imagine there's a little bit of a checklist that should go off through someone's head before they even make the call. What are the things that you would advise people to do to kind of get their affairs in order?
Well, especially if you're a spouse who doesn't know anything about your assets, your debts, your income, and your expenses, look at the mail. Check out, ask to see the tax returns, ask to be involved in any financial decisions. Obviously, you don't want to alert the other party if necessary. This is something you're trying to keep under wraps. But it could be an innocent question as to wanting to understand where the income is, what happens, what the bank accounts are. So a good place to look for that is what bank accounts are shown in the mail. Sure. I have a Discover letter. I have one from Bank of America. And so just keeping a track of what financial institutions you see. And obviously, if you open up any mail, what the expenses are, that's an important thing that I always tell parties. Certainly a call with an attorney is vitally important to understand what your next steps are, because they could vary on the circumstance. One of the things you should certainly keep in, and I've said certainly now about 3 times.
It's okay.
But I'm certain about it. You should always be aware of your rights under the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act. Okay. So under that act, you have the ability and should always call the police if you feel threatened, if you feel harassed. It can happen initially starting with the court calls domestic contretemps, which is a normal argument between a husband and wife. It can get heated. There can be horrible things said. But when it rises to the level of threats to your life or to your health, or to harm you or harm others, you want to make sure that the police are on your speed dial. You should know how to record things on your phone, both video and audio, to be prepared, because oftentimes these type of domestic violence matters are he said, she said. And so if you have a video or audio recording, you have a leg up of what really happened.
And is that New Jersey specific, or this is
so it's federal? Based on the federal legislation, but New Jersey, the Prevention of Domestic Violence Act is a New Jersey statute, which permits parties. In different states, it's called different things. Sure. In New Jersey, we have temporary restraining orders.
It's ultimately the same.
In New York, we have orders of protection, right? So, and the length and permanency of these orders can vary based upon each state. The important part is, no matter what state you're in, is you want to call the authorities if you feel threatened or harassed. And when parties initially go through a divorce matter, they're oftentimes living together, and that can be a very toxic situation. Sure. So you think you know someone, you married them, but things can change on a dime. Yeah. And so I always tell my clients, especially when they've initially consulted with me, those things. Look for the financial institutions as to where you keep your money. Make sure that you understand, because knowledge is power, all of the aspects of a divorce and what you could be entitled to, and make sure you're on high alert should there be any domestic violence. Yeah.
And obviously one of the big fallouts is how we're treating with the custody of the children. What is the default with, if you're a married couple, you've been married for 15, 20 years, you have two children, is there it always seemed just from the outside looking in, the mother gets the deference, but I don't know that that's actually the case. How does that get treated in the court system, or how do you kind of go down that process of, is it a 50-50 split, or, what is that like?
So there's 2 types of custody. There's legal custody and there's physical custody. Legal custody means you are making major decisions with regard to your children. And generally that is split 50-50. It is the rare chance when you don't have joint legal custody. And that would be when one parent has been proven incapable of making major decisions on behalf of the child. So generally, the default is joint legal custody. Physical custody is tough. So long ago, when I first started my practice, I wouldn't necessarily say the mother was the default, but the parent who did most of the work for the children, the one who primarily took care of the children, would continue to primarily to take care of the children. And oftentimes that was the mother. To use the gender stereotypes, it just that often was. Now more so in the latter half of my career, I've seen courts recognize that both parents have the right to take care of the children, even if that wasn't their primary job prior to the divorce. That can become their joint or primary job subsequent, depending on the situation. And so more and more, I've seen a trend towards 50-50 physical custody. Now, that means that a true physical custody is where does the child lay their head at night, right? So if you have 6 out of 14 overnights in a 2-week span, it's not joint physical custody. It has to be a true shared where you either switch 1 week on or 1 week off. You do Monday, Tuesday, the other parent does Wednesday, Thursday, and then you alternate Friday, Saturday, Sunday, something like that. And so that is honestly a rare circumstance where two individuals who are now divorcing or otherwise dissolving their relationship, working and co-parenting together in such a smooth manner, living close to one another, because you really have to live close in order to drive the child to school from both houses and pick them up from school. And so that is more of a default, but it is also rare because it's a high degree of cooperation.
Sure.
So often one parent is the parent of primary residence. So in my example, they would have 8 out of 14, and the other parent would be the parent of alternate residence, 6 out of 14. It could go anywhere from 1 overnight in 2 weeks to almost 50-50, and you'd still be the parent of alternate residence.
Sure. Does that seem to be the biggest sticking point with divorces, or is it, I would imagine it's financial or it's custody?
So there's always a financial key and component to it. So
to the custody part. Sure.
So I will tell clients to be on the lookout that if one spouse is surprising them and pushing to have more overnights, it could be because for child support purposes, you only get credit for the overnights. So if I take my child out after school, I take them to their activities, I give them dinner, and I return them to the former marital home at night, I get no credit for child support purposes. But if I keep them and bring them to school in the morning, keep them overnight, then I do get credit, and it substantially decreases child support. Child support's not a huge number in New Jersey, but it could be significant.
Sure.
And so I find that one parent sometimes is pushing for more overnights than they would normally do so because of the financial component. But
yeah. So I want to go back to the conversation I had with my son about prenups. And I have to be honest, when you're watching like a comedian and they say, oh, yesterday this happened and there's a joke, and you're like, that didn't actually happen. I actually had this conversation in the car this morning with my son.
I don't doubt you.
And we said, I said, basically, let's just say 2 people are getting married.
It's a contract.
It's a contract, and let's say they're in their 40s or 50s, and one person has several $1 million and the other person just didn't really have any money. Basically, contract saying, like, if this ends, the person that, you leave with what you came with, right? So, the question was, well, what if you don't have much of anything? You're young, you marry, whatever, you're not savers, and neither person has much of anything to kind of set forth in a contract. So who is then the right person for a prenup? Is it only just one person has a lot and the other person doesn't, and we just need to make clear that you're not going to get half of this? Or are there benefits of getting a prenuptial agreement that extend beyond just, let's make sure that we're leaving with what we came with?
So prenups, I'd say anyone are good for anyone, right? Often the 2 common scenarios that I see in my office for prenups are one, where there's a young couple that maybe their family has substantial assets. They are due to inherit, or they are being put into their names now. And so the key component of that prenup is, as you said, What is mine now, as of the date of our marriage. What's yours is yours. And if we commingle it or if we utilize it for a marital enterprise, it doesn't mean that it's now marital funds. And so I'll give you an example of that in a second. And the second scenario that I get common is maybe a second marriage, and that party wants to make sure that maybe they had children from the first marriage, that their children are protected and assets that they earned and saved for their children are not part of the marital estate. Now, both of those scenarios have to do with the issue of equitable distribution. Equitable distribution is the distribution of all your assets and all your debts from the date that you got married to the date someone files a complaint for divorce. So everything you earned is marital during your marriage, and everything you've saved or any debt you've incurred. That doesn't include assets earned from prior to your marriage, and that doesn't include any inheritance you've received during your marriage. Those are separate assets. But it's not likely, if you've been married, let's say 10 years, and you came into the marriage with an IRA in your name alone, that you just forgot about it. You just let it sit there. You didn't contribute to it. You didn't take money from it. You didn't roll it over into another account. You just let it sit there. If you just let it sit there, then maybe you don't need a prenup because that's your separate property and you don't need it. That's not common. Normally, let's say I want to buy a house with my spouse. Well, maybe I may use some of my inheritance. I may use a gift from my parents as pre-inheritance, or I may cash out my IRA for this down payment. And now I have a property that I put, let's say, $100,000 as a down payment on. My spouse didn't have access to any funds and didn't put the down payment. And we're divorced 10 years later. And I want, if we didn't have a prenup, that would be considered marital because I put it down on a house. I put both names on it. So under a case law, I technically gifted it to my spouse. We've been married and living there for 10 years as our primary residence. The court's not likely to award an unequal distribution of that. Now, in New Jersey, we have equitable distribution, not equal, and there are statutory factors, which include where did the money come from. So you have an argument to get an unequal distribution if you put in all the down payment, absolutely. But the longer you've lived in the home, the harder, the more of an uphill battle that can be, right? And so if you have a prenup, you don't have to worry about commingling, which is when you intermix your separate and marital assets, because it's clear in your agreement, the contract that you signed prior to your marriage, that even if you use this money for a home, even if you put it in joint names at some point, you're still going to be given your separate property back at the end of the day. So you don't have to worry about if, let's say you have a bank account, you worked hard prior to your marriage, you saved all of your bonuses, and you have a bank account of $100,000. And now you're married, especially in the beginning part of your marriage, you're taking from that bank account to pay a mortgage. That's a marital property. And so if you do that, now you've commingled that $100,000 you had prior to your marriage, and that could be subject to distribution. If you have a prenup, that's yours and yours alone. It doesn't matter if you utilize some of it to pay down a marital enterprise like your home. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons. That's one key issue that prenups look to. Prenups also can consider alimony. I never really recommend it because I'm not a fortune teller, and neither are usually or any of my clients. And so we don't know who's going to take time off of work to care for any future born children, who's going to be really, really successful, who may not be as successful, who is going to have a disability, who's going to not be able to be employed, who's going to have a sickness or some other reason why they can't earn money. And so at the time then you go to get a divorce, if you've waived your right to alimony, it could be at significant disadvantage. And those waivers are upheld because the court looks at, was the agreement unconscionable at the time it was entered, not at the time you're seeking to get a divorce. So at the time it was entered, if you're on equal footing, you're tough, there's nothing you can do. So that's an issue that prenups can deal with. Prenups also usually deal with your estate. So you're saying when you enter into a prenup that you don't doesn't matter what the law provides, such as my examples about commingling assets and, separate assets versus marital assets. You're agreeing in this contract to deal with your assets in a certain way. And the same thing goes for estate matters. So under New Jersey law, if you are not named in an estate of your spouse and they predecease you, you can claim an elective share, which is 1/3 of the estate. And so usually in prenups, we waive that right to elective share because you're saying, look, my will and whatever estate administration I do subsequent to this prenup is going to control, and I don't want the state to interfere with what I decide to do with my assets. So there's two sides of that coin, both in a divorce situation and in if one party predeceases the other.
So much to think about.
Sorry, I went on and on there.
No, I mean, it really kind of sheds some light as to like how much is involved.
Yes.
Typically go, okay, here's a bank account, we split in half, and here's the estate and split in half, but there's so much nuance to it. Shifting gears a little bit, and I feel like I would be remiss not to mention AI, and I am doing so only because I know you've written an article or two and you've sat on a couple of panels. How is artificial intelligence impacting family law right now? And if the answer is not too much yet, but here's where it's going, what are the things that people should start thinking about at this point?
So one of my colleagues said something to me, which I think really rings true. And they said, AI will not replace us attorneys, but the attorneys who embrace AI will replace the attorneys who don't.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true. And it's very true today. We all use AI in our everyday lives, from spell check to how when someone leaves us a voicemail and it's summarized,
Sure.
or how someone, we get an email and we get the summary of the email. Those type of things are AI and they're useful. I feel like my phone is always listening and suggesting different things.
Mm-hmm.
That's all AI. That's all artificial intelligence.
I feel like I'm going to start getting ads for divorce attorneys when we leave now.
100% you will. Hopefully they'll be for Stacey Cozewith.
Right.
Who knows? So, it's in our everyday lives, some tools that we can use as attorneys, not just family attorneys, but all attorneys. We can use AI tools to be more efficient. So for example, let's say I get, hundreds and hundreds of pages of credit card statements. And my client alleges that her husband has a girlfriend in France, and he's spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on her. And I want to not have my client pay for my paralegal to sit there and go through hundreds and thousands of pages of credit card statements. Instead, I can upload those credit card statements to a program that is paid for. You want to make sure that when you use these programs like ChatGPT or Adobe that have AI components, you're using the paid for programs, because the paid for programs, the plus programs, offer security. And you certainly would never want to upload any documents as a platform that's not secure.
Sure.
But you can utilize one of these platforms to scan for expenses outside the US, for expenses over $1,000, over $500. And while you may not get each and every, because AI is imperfect, just like us as humans, we're imperfect, you're going to get a good starting point for things like that. You could use AI. Let's say my client has crypto and my discovery requests don't address whether they have Bitcoin. I could use AI to help me come up with a question. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out a question, they can give me suggestions. So AI can be certainly very useful in our everyday practice and make us more efficient, which is why I think that quote rang true, because you're going to want to hire the attorneys who are more efficient. You certainly, though, can't use AI to write legal briefs for you. There's so many cases out that make the news every week about attorneys being sanctioned for writing briefs that cite to fictitious cases that don't happen. So AI can be useful for starting points, for arguments, whatever the case may be, but you have to double check and triple check everything that is AI generated for sure, especially before providing it to the court. So, in those ways, AI is beneficial, but there's also the pitfalls, not just the pitfalls I mentioned about fictitious cases, but AI can be used to manipulate photographs and other evidence. And that's scary, especially in the realm of domestic violence, when the evidence is so much of phone records, videos, text messages, they can all be deep fake manipulated. And so you really have to be willing to obtain experts who can tell you if they're manipulated, look for contrary evidence, and make sure that, when your client says, this text chain never happened or these emails didn't happen, you trust them and you say it's possible. It's possible that this could be a deep fake, and you investigate that.
Do you think the family law court system is equipped to kind of handle this, or we're dealing with it just like everyone else?
Yeah, I think it judges on case-by-case basis, just like any attorney. Some attorneys use email constantly. Some attorneys print out all their pages. I have a very close friend who's my age, so not relatively young. I'll give myself.
Yes.
I'm in my mid-40s. Yes. Who still uses a handwritten calendar. Yeah. So everyone's comfort with technology is different. And so that rings true judges. I hope in this day and age, with all of the panels and informations and CLEs and topics, that it is a area that most judges are aware of. But you could run into a judge that says, I don't know what a deep fake is. And that's where it's my job as an attorney to make sure you educate whoever it is, whether it's, your opposing counsel or the court.
Yeah. So one last family law related question before we get to some more fun, get to know Stacy type of question. So what advice would you give to a couple, and not just individual? You mentioned kind of getting your documents in order and that type of thing. If a couple is entering into divorce, what is the one thing that they should know? Advice that you can give them?
Take a step back and try and be reasonable. Put yourself in the other's shoes. I often mediate matters as I work as an attorney and for one party often, but I also mediate or arbitrate matters, and couples can hire me, and they have before, to help them resolve a matter without me representing either one of them, to help end the process. And so I would say, do your best, especially if you have children, to take a step back, to not argue in front of the kids, and to make sure you both get attorneys. You both want to make sure that you understand exactly what you're entitled to, what the law allows, and have open conversations about where the money is, where your assets are, what your debts are. So everyone is on the same page, not thinking that you're a millionaire when you're in debt $1 million. You want to make sure that you have exchanged all relevant documentation, and that everyone is starting from the same knowledge base, because it's only then, when all the information is out there, that you can actually come to a resolution. And so, just put yourself in the other person's shoes and try and be as reasonable as possible, because at the end of the day, you both want the same thing. Sure. You got married for a reason. You have to remember that. And you both want to get out, as quickly as you can.
Sure. So a few more lighthearted questions. Stacy, on her free time, it's Saturday afternoon. Hopefully you don't have any work to do. What are you doing in your free time? What do you like to do?
I have 3 children.
Yeah.
So most of the time I'm running between their sports or activities on the weekend. My ideal day would be, especially it's just starting to be summer, would be to go down to the beach.
Whereabouts do you go?
I grew up going down to Belmar, and I currently have a small place in Long Branch. So I like both of those beaches very much. That would be an ideal summer day. During the week, though, most of the time I'm baseball or soccer or basketball or dance around. Or, all activities or play dates, and, just hanging out and enjoying each other. That's my ideal.
I like it. One thing you can't live without.
Oh, the nice thing to say would be my family, because of course I can't live without them.
Family aside.
I do love just to hang out and watch TV, sit by the pool. I like to run. That's my chosen form of exercise, clear my head, or read a good book. I do enjoy reading as well. Sure.
Favorite fictional lawyer?
So it's hard because she's actually not a lawyer, but my favorite fictional character on a TV show would be Donna, Harvey's Donna.
In Suits?
In Suits.
Okay.
Because she ran the show and she got what she wanted in the end. And she was my favorite character on that TV show.
Okay, we'll take that. Okay. Close enough.
Yeah.
If you could represent one high-profile client from the past that went through a very public divorce, who would that have been?
Tough one. That's a tough one, Tim.
Is there ever one you watched and you're like, oh, I wish I could have got my hands on that. That would have been fun.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's a tough one because usually it maybe the Johnny Depp trial. That was a tough one.
High profile for sure.
That would have been really interesting,
yeah.
Right? That was something recent, but most of if I would handle, and I've handled some high profile clients, you want to keep it out of the public arena.
Sure.
You want to resolve it quickly.
You don't want to be on
quietly.
TV. Yeah.
You don't. So if I was on TV, it would be because that was plan B.
Yeah.
Plan A didn't go. And so I don't want to ever be in that circumstance if I can avoid it.
That's a good answer. So we're now office mates. You're down the hall from me.
Yes.
Office pet peeves. What is the one thing that drives you crazy when you walk in the office and something is there and you go, people
office
just don't,
peeves.
How come you don't clean your dishes? Or,
oh no.
I'm just asking so I know how not to make you upset.
I like, one of the things I enjoy about our office is everyone's super friendly and welcoming. And so when I walk down the hall, and listen, my door's closed when I'm on Zoom or when I'm, meeting with a client at times, but to see everyone's doors open and smiling and good morning, that's my preferred, because you work, we all have families at home and crazy people we're dealing with, whether for you it's in the office or for me it's my clients. And so there's stress everywhere, and we do spend an inordinate amount of time at work because that's our lifestyle. And so we, it's nice to have those friendly relationships and to make work as pleasurable as possible. So my pet peeve would be grumpy people who are the opposite.
Okay. We don't have any of those.
No, we don't.
Of course
we
not.
Don't. We don't.
All right. Well, Stacy, thank you so much for joining us. This was fun.
This was awesome.
If anybody has any questions for Stacy, you can reach her at SCOZEWITH@Saiber.com.
Got it.
Thank you to everyone for listening and watching. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channel, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks again, Stacy.
Sounds good.